The U.S. Women's National Team shipped 6 goals past Paraguay tonight, and we had to hop on and talk about it. Welcome to today's, we'll say, edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Saturday, January 24th, and we just watched the United States defeat Paraguay 6-0 with a very young, very inexperienced group that is nonetheless finding their way. Really, really excited to dig into some goal scorers, some sequences I thought were really interesting, and how actually what we're seeing from this young group maybe says as much about how Emma Hayes wants her team to play as it does just the players on the pitch. Let's dig in. So the U.S. is back, and they started the year out strong this evening with a 6-0 win over Paraguay, and we are going to talk about it. Some big picture stuff. We got Trinity Rodman named captain for the first time after a triumphant fitness return. We got 60 minutes out of Rodman tonight, which is awesome. Obviously coming off a huge week for her, huge contract renewal with the Washington Spirit that we saw on Thursday. Nice to see her moving as freely as she was tonight. We will talk, I'm sure, more about the Spirit and the NWSL at depth as we get closer to the beginning of that season. But let's talk about the U.S. Women's National Team, Trinity Rodman's U.S. Women's National Team, because I really liked what we saw tonight for a variety of reasons, not just the final score line. Now, starting with the starting 11, I didn't quite, if you listen to this week's show, I didn't quite get the starting 11 lineup, starting lineup combos that I was hoping for initially, but a very interesting group nonetheless. We saw Kennedy Wesley getting time in the central defense. I thought that was very cool to see. We saw Raylan Turner getting a first cap with the United States. Got to see goalkeeper Mandy McGlynn get some experience in goal, which I think is very valuable. Thought she did a perfectly steady job this evening with not that much kind of coming at her. Another really young group that had a great run out against admittedly overmatched, they're an overmatched opponent. Somehow, this team keeps getting less and less experienced every time they take the pitch. Both hilarious and awesome to see them play with such confidence. The starting 11 tonight averaged 9.6 caps going into the game, which is the fewest average caps for a starting lineup in 25 years. So despite the fact that it feels like we're kind of repeating this stat over and over and over again, youngest team since this year or least experienced team since this year, we're still getting younger and we're still getting less experienced all the way going back to 2001. And this was a very attacking group, a very attacking formation. That's kind of what we expected, knowing who they were going to be playing, and even just sort of the tenors of this roster. This is a young group, as we said, eager to prove themselves at the international stage. They've had a layoff of, over a month. I'm sure they were very excited just to get out there and play a soccer game. And I felt like tonight's performance, and we're going to talk about this in a variety of ways, indicated exactly what versatility Emma Hayes is looking for, even when she's got a group of players who have less experience or maybe less close to that nucleus of maybe what they anticipated a starting 11 to look like next year at the World Cup. The formation felt like it alternated between kind of this 4-3-3 and a 3-4-3, a lot of hybrid movement in the midfield, anchored by the veteran presence of Lo LaBonta. Great to see her out there for the U.S. And now the international experience of, I keep referring to her as the glue, Claire Hutton. She just turned 20 years old, and she was one of the more experienced players on the pitch out there tonight. And I thought she did a wonderful job of being steady, confident, got the captaincy there in the second half. And that was kind of the anchor of what we saw in the midfield that was asked to do a lot of intuitive movement while also maintaining width. And we're going to talk about how that worked. The U.S. came out flying. We saw outside back Giselle Thompson, who was on my list to watch, and I thought she had a really good run out tonight. She was on the same side as Rodman. Those two were hitting fast overlapping runs on the same side of the wing. Really exciting to see that potential, especially again with how attacking the outside backs were tonight. We kind of expected that. It was fun actually to go to a couple of different, analysis or kind of like stat recording websites and see there are different interpretations of who actually was on the front line for the United States tonight, because I think that there are some differing opinions, and it changed constantly, which is exactly what they were looking for. You had some players sitting high, you had some players ducking in, and it was sort of this free-flowing thing where it did not feel like the movement was rigid or stuck on some concept of what they want to be doing, even again in sort of either a 4-3-3 or a 3-4-3. Izzy Rodriguez was the other outside back on the left side. She was camped out almost higher than Thompson. Sometimes you would see the U.S. in possession at the center backs, and it would look like they were playing, 2-6-3 at times. Like they really trusted that center back pairing to hold the ball. They weren't too worried about what Paraguay was going to be bringing them in the other direction, and they let the outside backs sit very, very high to get emphasis on numbers going forward, providing those wide outlets necessarily to benefit from the talent gap, frankly, that they were looking at this evening. And I thought as the U.S. got played in on the ball, I mean, they were a little rushed in that first half. You know, they looked a little overexcited, a little overeager. There were some moments in the final third that didn't quite come to fruition because they were trying to do a little bit too much too soon. Very normal, again, for the team coming off a layoff, and very normal for a team this young and this eager to show what they can do. You saw the goals come, right? This turned into something where it was a little bit of a deadlock just because the U.S., they were dominating possession. They couldn't get the breakthrough. They get their first goal right before halftime. And then as we saw in the second half, 5 goals follow. So yes, we saw 6 goals in that game. And let's talk about a few of those. Raylan Turner, with functionally the last kick of the first half, gets her first goal in her first game. Always lovely to see. It's a little bit like a shooting star to get to see first cap, first goal. Always wonderful to see that kind of confidence from a player. And we'll talk about her goal in a second because I really liked it in general. The second half saw 2 goals by Ali Sentner, an own goal heavily influenced by Croy Bethune, a goal by Emma Sears, and a goal by the player of the week herself, Captain Trinity Rodman. As I mentioned, really nice to see 60 minutes from Rodman in this match. I think she left that championship game, NWSL championship game in November, where you're like, the knee's a problem, the back's a problem, just wanting her to kind of clear out that, you know, that the ability to sort of take some time away from soccer to really get healthy. I think we saw that. Not only did we see 60 minutes from Rodman, but they were 60 good minutes. I thought her movement was really good and astute, and it felt like she wasn't just thinking about her fitness while she was out there. Really important. Hayes had also said going into this game that in this young group, this young camp without the European-based players and without Gotham's players, she was looking for leadership specifically from 3 people. Those people were Rodman, Hutton, and Emily Sams. I think that genuinely shined through tonight. I think Rodman's leadership style is always going to be a little bit different. I think she even said that after the game. She's someone who wants to lead through like exuberance and joy and creativity and have that sort of be not only an infectious kind of feeling on the team, but having other players feel like they can fit into that. And if you're watching a player like Rodman at her best, that should calm you down. Hutton is very different, as we know. Hutton is a player that isn't always super flashy, though she had some cool stuff tonight. I don't know if you saw that clip of her in the first half. She was twirling on the ball. She was doing back heel passes. She was having a lot of fun. Hutton is a player that I think always starts with the fundamentals and then adds on to that. She's going to always be a little bit of a different kind of presence, but I'm just not surprised that as young as she is, she got a leadership role tonight and was given the armband in the second half. I think the world of Claire Hutton. I think that she's an incredible player, and I think is going to be a very important leader for this team as she continues to get older. Sams did not start tonight. She did not feature into that leadership quite as much, but I'm curious to see if maybe we see that more on Tuesday. And as this game, kind of like I said, got out of hand quickly, there were a couple goals that felt like maybe just, you know, in other circumstances, perhaps those would have been saved or would have been blocked. I think it makes the most sense to pull a few performances, a few moments that I think will be carried not only into Tuesday's game against Chile, but forward even just as the U.S. progresses into the year. Because as we talked about with this group, with this roster, they're missing a lot of players who are going to be heavily featured in World Cup qualifying or even anticipated to be heavily featured in the World Cup next year. But I was even struck by, and this will be my last little note before we dive in, is the World Cup still feels very far away. It's less than 2 years away. It's about 18 months away, maybe a little bit less than that now, actually, frankly, right? But watching a player like Giselle Thompson or a player like Raylan Turner or, you know, a player like even Lola Bonta getting that leadership role tonight, or just seeing these different leadership points, seeing Kennedy Wesley get some time, you are kind of reminded that we just don't know what the future holds. And I think that's exactly what the project of all of this is for Emma Hayes, of you can't write off that any of these individual players won't be in the mix by the time this final roster gets announced before 2027 World Cup. We just don't know, which is why these performances are important, and I want to treat them as such. So let's talk about, for example, this opening goal by Raylan Turner, who has been a very good player. She was a very good player for Portland last year. She was a quality young player that actually got traded to Portland after kind of figuring out where she fit in the NWSL. I've always thought she's been very, very good. And the nice thing that I liked about her goal, not only because of the fact that the U.S. was finally able to punch a goal in after a strong 45 minutes of possession and ball movement, is that it looked like her. It looked like the Raylan Turner that we see play in the NWSL. And I think that as an attacker is really, really important. So in the league, Turner has a talent for getting shots off inside the box. She's comfortable at wide angles as a finisher. She can also, kick goals in. She can get really, really good opportunities from closer to the penalty spot. I would not call her a poacher, but she is able to turn her runs into high quality shots. And that's what she replicated with sort of that left angle slip right before halftime. It was soft angling from both the defender and the goalkeeper on letting it actually go in. But I think if you're looking at a whole portfolio of attacking chances from a player like Turner, and also, again, just being able to punch it in is worth something on its own, it's very important to see a young NWSL player succeed the way they succeed in the league at the international level. She retained her identity as a player. She was able to do that same kind of quality movement that she's known for on Portland at the club side. And when you bring those young players in, there are a couple players on this roster I would put in that bucket of they've had a couple professional years underneath them, at least one professional year underneath them. They have not been in the U.S. senior team system maybe prior to the second half of last year, but you bring them in based on their club performances, and you want to see if they can replicate that at the international level. And so it's not just Turner scoring, it's her doing what she does best in a U.S. jersey. And I know that sounds simple, but it's just not. How many forwards have we seen come through this system where it just doesn't feel like they can quite get that mojo or get that movement or that kind of mental focus or collaboration with her teammates at the international level that we know that she can do for club? It's a long list. It's a long list. And so for Turner not only to get that goal, but to get it the way that she did, I think is incredible tape for a player who obviously up until this window, we weren't entirely sure where she stood with the U.S. So I thought that was a great moment. Again, a little bit of a soft, the fact that it actually went in maybe spoke as much about Paraguay as it did about the shot itself, but it was a high quality chance. It was the movement that she's known for. I think that kind of stuff is important as they're figuring out who is going to be sort of outside this nucleus of players that they hope to either see return on the front line or they know are sitting out because of other obligations. Really good stuff. And the other player I actually want to talk about and give a little bit of time to is a player that did not score today. All the goals were really good. I thought Sentner had a great game. Sears is such a lovely known property coming off the bench. She's so fast. And actually, Sears plays into the way I want to talk about this other player who is Olivia Moultrie. Because I think Moultrie, as a player from sort of outside the bubble, outside looking in as often as not, post, Olympics, we're talking about how Hayes is cultivating her roster. She has kind of become this example of Hayes's tactical changes that I think is really interesting. For a player that we don't always think of as an A1 starting player for the United States, every time Moultrie is utilized in this particular way that she was utilized in this game, I feel like as much about the tactical progression for Hayes in the attack as it is just about individual personnel. So let's talk about that for a second. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here to lay out sort of the concept that I was thinking about watching this game. I was struck this week by a piece of fun U.S. Women's National Team content that was put out by Emma Hayes, which was, I think she was at Disneyland. I think that's right. They've been in California. Her Star Wars starting 11. Stick with me here. I'm making a soccer point. So Hayes hits all of the good, obvious Star Wars characters. It's very well thought out. I highly recommend checking it out. She's talking about General Grievous in goal. She's got all these different points for why a player would be good in different, or why a Star Wars character would be good in different positions on a soccer pitch. But she closes the video just talking about functional roles in a starting 11 that she might be looking for. And she says, Luke Skywalker is the number 10, blah, 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 blah. But she ends this video talking about the right winger position. And she says this player is going to be almost interchanging with Luke Skywalker as the brains of the attack. And she puts Yoda there, which kind of became a bug in my brain because now I'm watching this match, and I think I'm going to be thinking about this going forward because this is something Moultrie has talked about in the past, but it's that Yoda role now. It's who's Yoda? Who is, being Yoda in Hayes' starting 11? And Moultrie was not on the right side. She was on the left side tonight. But more often than not, that is the player who you are seeing get that role. And it is this concept of that we're talking about, sort of that 4-4 or 4-3-3 or the 3-4-3. Of this midfielder winger kind of quasi combo where she either wants her wingers comfortable cutting into the midfield or she wants her midfielders comfortable sliding out wide to create better attacking opportunities in conversation with like the great attacking width of the outside backs. And that's what Moultrie did tonight. And that is something that Moultrie has done. I think she's done it. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure she's done it from both the right and the left side for the U.S. in the last 6 months. She's pretty like directionally flexible. And she's talked about how Hayes has sort of challenged her to be more comfortable pushing out wide and being that sort of quasi player that can open space up or can open up opportunities for herself. And I think that's really interesting and a very interesting tweak to what the U.S. is doing, especially after seeing sometimes these very talented attacking midfielders get kind of slotted out to the wings to die, right? We do see that sometimes. Haven't seen it in a minute, which is why, again, I think this is interesting. We've seen even Rose Lavelle before the Olympics. We weren't sure, like, what are they doing with her coming back into the team? It seems like they would sometimes slot her out onto the left wing, and you'd be like, why is Rose Lavelle playing on the left wing? Or sometimes when Jaden Shaw would get, dropped into a U.S. lineup, she'd be also out on the wing, and they would, like, be stuck out there, and they'd be trying to provide depth, and it would be this kind of thing that works against their greater tendencies as a player. Whereas I think now, if you're looking at the way that Hayes is very willing to structure her attack, very midfield heavy, either midfielders that are comfortable playing wide or getting out in front, or with wingers that are comfortable tucking in, we saw that fluidity work. And I especially want to talk about the third goal that was scored in this game after we saw the opener from Turner and we saw a second from Sentner. There was a third goal that was sprung and basically finished by Croix Bethune. But it speaks to this starting 11 where you're looking at all of these different players and their versatility options, right? I think you could even look at Rodman here as the right winger. She's really, really good at cutting in. That is something that she's always been very good at. Even before Rodman became known as a goal scorer at the international level, one of the things you could always trust her to do was have really interesting collaborations with the midfield. She checks back a lot. She's really interested in cutting back to overlapping runs from the midfield. That is something that she prefers probably more than doing kind of any sort of crosses in. And again, she kind of leaves that to her outside back, who a lot of times is actually playing wider than Rodman is. That communication, that kind of even defense from an attacking position, that's something that Rodman has always been very good at, especially even when she's having trouble finding her way into a game, which did not happen tonight, but something that she can do against stiffer competition. Sentner is a player that we know is known for her versatility, and sometimes to her detriment. I think she's still figuring out where she plays in sort of the attacking motion, both for the current and for the United States. But she is like a false nine player that can tuck back into the midfield. She can play point number 10. She can run at a goal. Sentner's ability to do a lot of different things, I think, has been a real benefit to her place on the U.S. Women's National Team. And then we've got Moultrie, who I find interesting in that inverted wingers or wingers cutting in is not a new concept. I think it's interesting to take a midfielder, push her out wide, as even, you could look at her as a more traditional, like, again, wide midfielder, something like that. I think that there's a lot of space that she covers. But we've just seen a lot of midfielders struggle to do that for the United States in the last couple of years, except Moultrie is actually very adept at it, which is also neat because she doesn't do that a lot for Portland. She's a more traditional kind of number 8, number 10. She's a little bit of more of a traditional kind of connecting and attacking midfielder for Portland, and she was very good for them doing that this season as well. And so I don't know if any of this is going to result in, kind of core places on the U.S. Women's National Team. But whenever we talk about players who have a shot, that versatility is really important. And again, we saw what that looks like in this third goal, which I want to shout out Bethune too, because she starts this sequence and she finishes it. She springs movement with the ball at her feet. She tracks the play while sending the ball wide. Sentner vacates the space in front of her, pulling the defense in, opening up this crossing movement for Bethune as Moultrie slips out wide. Moultrie sends in the delivery. Bethune creates the goal opportunity off of her own forward possession, forward play. Now, that ended up being an own goal. Poor Croix Bethune still does not technically have a U.S. goal to her name, but that was probably the best finishing sequence of the whole game. I mean, things started to stretch after that. A lot of really nice individual finishes, but that was the team goal of this particular match. And it happened through the versatility of those three players and them doing exactly what they had been instructed to do, but doing it intuitively at the same time, which we know is so necessary for that kind of attacking chemistry. So really just interesting. I don't know. It's like you watch these games and you see how the team is trying to grow and change, and you're seeing players step up and do really well, and you don't know how to place significance on it, but that felt significant. Moultrie has been given very specific instructions for the United States coaching staff, and she's executing it really well. Sentner, I think, in the same way. We saw it from Turner and getting into her right positions. We saw Rodman look like her old self. We saw, again, some really nice width options given from the outside backs, Thompson and Rodriguez. Like, you're looking at that and you're going like, this is great. The depth is firing on all cylinders, and that is just such a testament to what Hayes has done, where it's not just that you're seeing players not get rattled, but you're seeing them execute some fairly nuanced tactical ideas while in heavy possession, rather than just, hoofing the ball up and seeing what they can do. So I liked it. I mean, it's easy to walk away from a 6-0 win and say that you liked it, but a lot of really good, interesting things that I think say as much about what Hayes wants to do looking at World Cup qualifying, which is different than a World Cup. You face different competition in World Cup qualifying in CONCACAF than you do necessarily in a World Cup. And I like that they're thinking about what they're going to do in those situations as well. Now, what I would like to see on Tuesday, some quick stuff. We got 30 minutes of Hal Hirschfeld. Would love to see more of that in game 2. I still think that there's a huge opportunity there if she can have it. Maybe they're thinking of a total swap and have Bug and Sams as the center back pairing in the second game. Would love to see some Sam Meza, maybe more of Menti or Dalian, just a lot of good options. And like I said, just more confident play from this group, finding new leadership structures. It feels really good. Like at the beginning of 2024, this will be my final thing. At the beginning of 2024, Hayes was already talking about new leadership structures, even before she came in. That was, before she was done with Chelsea, but they were talking about that. In 2025, they were talking about new leadership structures. And then now at the beginning of 2026, same conversation, new younger generation of players who are continuing to step up and do a good job of leading the team on the pitch. That kind of leadership rejuvenation is really important in the modern game. And I think it's actually one of those specific things that Hayes was interested in tackling as she saw the U.S. begin to age in 2023 going into 2024. And so we're seeing that. Now, they're going to have stiffer competition going forward. I'm interested to see what happens against Chile. They announced they're going to be having 3 games against Japan in April. There's obviously She Believes in February. Things are going to look a little bit different. Now they have to figure out how to reintegrate these other players who are watching these games from home, whether you're a Gotham player or if you are a player based in Europe. But it's good stuff. The U.S. feels like it's in a really good place. Saw a lot of nice performances tonight. And as always, fun to break it down. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women Sports newsletter and follow Just Women Sports across all your favorite channels.